Welcome back, dear viewers. So we've just had our daily du'as, and that was a lovely start to the day, and hope you enjoyed that as well. We are now going to be introducing Brother Bilal Ali to the specialist, where today's discussion that we're going to be having is about adolescent brain development. And there's a lot of hot topics going on at the moment in the media. So firstly, Assalamu alaikum, Brother Bilal.
Alaikum salam.
Welcome again.
Thanks.
Another
Thanks
morning.
for inviting me.
Another morning and another discussion.
Oh yeah.
So I've been reading recently about talking about letting teenagers start school, college later, 10 a.m. because they're not programmed to sort of have early morning starts, and it's affecting their mental health, their productivity, and then also being aware that in some European countries children don't start school till 7 years old, and obviously Europe being our neighbours, it's quite different from the UK, isn't it? What do you think in terms of development for children? What is your sort of personal perspective on how we should be nurturing the adolescent brain and getting the best out of?
That's a really interesting question, Sister Zara. That's a really interesting question. I think that we have to look at the educational system. So we're in Britain. So the educational system in Britain was devised, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 100 years ago plus. And what was the reasoning behind the educational system coming together? For example, in the Muslim world, we're told as Muslims that we should seek knowledge as far as China, and we're told in the Quran, Iqra, read, and there's all these different things about gaining knowledge. We gain we gain specialisms, or we just gain insights. Is it to become a more productive member of the society? Is it to work towards reaching your goal, your spiritual goal, and reaching the ultimate, reaching Jannah, inshallah, and be able to help people along the way, and whatever the case may be, and take care of your responsibilities. But in the West, is a different. The educational system that we've inherited is a different reason.
Right.
It's come out of the industrial revolution, or response to the industrial revolution, and so we have education on an industrialized level. So it's not about there isn't that much time to work out who is or wasn't that much time to work out who's a kinetic learner, who learns by touch, who learns by sound, who learns by visuals and things of this nature. It needs to be uniform, because why? The factory needs to open at 9 and it needs to shut at 5. So we need to condition these people to be able to gain a certain level of literacy, numeracy, so that they can provide certain functions in the factory, and kind of like when the whistle goes, break for lunch, when the peeps go to your next lesson, so it's about it's been very productive. It's been being built. I'm not just critiquing it. I'm analyzing it and saying it's quite competent people that put this together. However,
but it's not one size fits all, though, is it?
That's where that's where we have the challenge, because there's so many different types of people in terms of learning approaches, in terms of, as you said, I kind of infer that maybe the children are starting to go to school too early. There's some Islamic literature that says you shouldn't really teach children till they're 7. Just let them play a bit. Just start drilling stuff into them so early. I know we're an organism, but there's only so much you can kind of take, and you burn people out.
I mean, we're seeing obviously with the adolescent, age, and how people learn at schools. They're not, like you said, there's such different methods, and we're learning more and more how children react and respond to different methods of learning. So we still haven't updated our techniques of how to, I guess, deliver that, that new research.
Definitely. We could learn that as a Muslim community. I mean, you watch some of the methods in terms of, and this is no slight, but you watch those film footage of children, Aleph, Ba, and like giving them,
I had that as a child.
And I kind of wonder as a student of psychology that I fear about. Well, I see, apart from it just being unkind, but what about you're learning Arabic, you're learning the Book of Allah, and that pain is inflicted. Are you going to get like a kind of classical condition, like an aversion, or there's a negative association? So that's kind of worrying. But children are so unique, and the point of the matter is that everybody learns differently, and some people are geniuses, but they never get to access that because their learning style wasn't discovered. And it's a shame. It's a loss for them, but also a loss for the community.
And I think you're right, because if we're looking at a sort of an industrial based education compared to sort of Islam, which is, you know, spiritual, religious, all of these sides of, you know, of a religion that embraces a human beings, you know, holistically and completely, that we're not really reaching our potential, where we don't focus on our spiritual development. We think about, right, I need to read this book, and that's my definition of success when I've graduated from a particular university with a particular degree, a particular profession. But actually that's probably not even touching base on the rest of us, that, you know, perhaps we could have gone through the years of school and really, you know, sort of been able to investigate what other options were available to us rather than this industrial version. And I think young adults, they are struggling with that, aren't they, of their identity in terms of what is best for them. Do they go towards sort of this religion and more about where their strengths are, focus on that, or do they go for what we are programmed in school, right? Get the grades, get those, you know. What would you say as a psychotherapist?
I see that a balance, the mizan, is what really would work, because there's the need for the psycho-spiritual development of the individual, but also we're living in a particular, say for example, those of us living in the West, we live in particular types of societies where, you know, competence and productivity does have its place. I mean, it has its place everywhere, but in a particular way. Yeah, it has it, and you know, so in terms of meeting our responsibilities, for example, looking at the brothers, young men who become, I mean, young boys who are going to become men, they're going to have specific economic responsibilities as men when they grow up and become married. So, you know, there's that element. There's that element to it. So I've you know, looked at some older literature and looked at some models in, say, for example, West Africa, where even when people were studying to become what we would use the term nowadays, clerics, right, that they would also be taught a trade, a specific trade, something specific, shoemaking, blacksmith, whatever it was, but some particular trade that, as well as being a cleric, there was a kind of, you know, they had a skill that were related to becoming a, you know, employable or being an entrepreneur. And that, I think that means that person was free to be a cleric as, or, you know, as a full vocation and a spiritual calling, or they just had that knowledge and insight that could benefit people themselves as well, but they were maybe the local tradesmen as well.
So do you think, because something that's really always been interesting in you know, during my travels, is seeing how the West has you know, their attitude towards children and development of children, and then the East, where, you know, struggles, war, poverty, third world countries, their attitude is very different. So, you know, you'll see more child labour on the streets. It's very obvious there, and the disparity between the two regions in the world. Are we sort of not strictly East and West, but do you think that there's more work to be done on that side of the world to understand children need, or is it a right attitude to say, you know what, just get up and get on with it? It's not, you know. So do we mollycoddle our children on this side, or do you think it's something? Are we too soft, or are we too strict on that side?
I think that there's something, there are benefits. You know, I mean, a few hundred years ago in this country, as much as Britain may boast of being, you know, a bastion of democracy and all things of this nature, you know, everybody's developing. Every country is a developing country. Because it wasn't that long ago they were sending children up chimneys and you know, a whole Dickensian thing and you know, children begging in the streets and whatever. So I think that Britain has done a good job. And many Western countries have done a good job with things like you know, it's inherent now in, if you work in institutions that involve children, there's all, you know, safeguarding and child protection legislation. So I think those are good things. I think that there's no shame in Muslim societies learning from those things. I don't think we should be egotistical as Muslims, because there was a time when we were setting the pace and other people was learning from us. And I think that what enabled Muslim societies to develop and reach certain heights was Muslims came into contact with other civilizations and were able to kind of absorb that knowledge and kind of integrate it into the Islamic world, as opposed to seeing it as that's Kafir knowledge and this is the Islamic halal knowledge and that stays over there. It was a way of kind of, you know, critiquing stuff and integrating what could be useful. So I think there is some benefit definitely in learning from some of the structures in terms of child protection and safeguarding of children, because they are vulnerable. Children are vulnerable.
Yes, they are.
Children are vulnerable and they do need protecting in that way. So I think that's definitely commendable in the West, the part of the West.
It's quite sad, because when you see children on the streets, and you know, it's the wisdom they've learned through, their difficult life already that they've gone through. And I often look at them and think, do you have teenager tantrums or you're not allowed to have them because
are you allowed that luxury?
Are you allowed that luxury? Absolutely. And here we say, well, do they need to start at 10 a.m. and, oh, he's having a temper tantrum because he's a teenager now. And we give there's so many excuses to teenagers here that, and it's probably a good thing for them because we're understanding that, hormones are...
You said teenager tantrums, and what's interesting is that there's research that's come out. It's been, it's been the body of evidence has been building for a while, but, talking about, adolescent brain development, and, the research is showing that, children, I think probably around the age of 6, the brain is fully developed, about 90% developed, right, into its entirety. In terms of his weight and size, whatever. But in terms of the connections, in terms of brain connections, that hasn't developed, and certain parts of the brain hasn't fully developed yet. So you have this part of the brain which is called the amygdala, and that's a more kind of emotion-driven, impulse-driven, aggression-driven part of the brain, and it's one of the first parts of the brain that develops. Hence the terrible twos and these different things of tantrums and impulsiveness and being emotional. Then there's the prefrontal cortex, which is the kind of critical brain, the brain that deals with judgment, analysis, abstract thinking and things of that nature. And that doesn't fully develop until something like the mid-20s.
Wow.
So what happens is, although it exists, but put in stressful situations or when there's not time to think, or rapid situations, that the teenagers often, their thought processes often revert to the amygdala, to the emotional brain. So think of it as a thinking brain and a feeling brain. So they work off of the feeling brain a lot, and that's why teenagers can be subject to, or partly this explains because there's a kind of neurological element, there's an environment element, there's a socializing element, there's all these different elements of the individual's personal psychological makeup as well. Some people are more introvert, extrovert, or different in agreeable, disagreeable type of personality traits. But it basically gives us some insight into why teenagers can be impulsive, can be subject to mood swings, can be outraged, and take danger, because risk-taking behaviors as well is and from a neurological point of view is quite characteristic. It's from a neurological perspective, it's like not surprising that teenagers are risky, because they're kind of, in a way you could say, breaking away from the identity of the parent, and developing their own life experiences and their own identity. And like I said, neurologically, they're kind of wired to be risky, because it makes sense that they're going to discover the world if they don't take risks. So there's an element of it that's healthy, but there's an element of it that gives parents, caregivers, elders palpitations when they find out the type of behaviors that sometimes teenagers are adolescents are involved in.
Yeah, it's interesting that in some ways, the way that you're explaining it, you could see it as a positive, because they've got the environment where they can express themselves, and that may be to an adult, temperamental, maybe mood swings here and there, unpredictable, but it allows a child to give that expression, and at that point, at that age, perhaps that's what they need. Although it's very difficult to tolerate from an adult perspective, but then, because then like I said, when we look at children that are go through child labour, and they don't have that luxury of someone comforting them, saying, go and have a temper tantrum, it's okay, because perhaps they're orphaned, or perhaps they've gone through a war's issue, or
the environment would not accommodate, the social environment would not accommodate.
How does that impact a child's development in that side of the world, where perhaps they've gone through a war, and and what happens to all those mood swings and the emotional sort of centre of the brain that you're referring to in sort of a healthy, normal child who's not gone through any major...
It'd be interesting to look at the research in that, because as much as there's different factors that affect the brain. So in terms of what stage a person, it's not just age, but what stage of puberty they're at. So in terms of the chemicals, the hormones that are being released in the body. But I'm thinking about diet. in terms of certain societies, what type of diet that a child, in terms of nutrition, do they have sufficient nutrition? Is that going to affect their, in one way or another, is that going to impact? Also, maybe like brain development as well, because of what people's exposed to. Like, what's the impact of trauma on the brain? We know, at least we're clear about what trauma does to the mind. The mind is a kind of unseen element, right? The kind of unknowable part, but we know parts of it. How's that impacted?
Does it inhibit their growth?
Exactly. I'm thinking, is it arrested development? Like, people stunted basically on a certain level. But Allah has created people that's, you know, the human being in such a magnificent way that even being born in an environment and exposed to an environment like that, it will still produce outstanding individuals with outstanding stories.
Definitely.
So even the environment and all the factors which seem like this person shouldn't, to our knowledge, but Allah knows best, right? Like, sometimes remarkable individuals come from environments like that.
It's
fascinating.
It is, absolutely, and I think we can't. That's the beautiful thing about a human being. We don't know who's going to excel in the circumstances they're put in. But I was having a conversation recently about somebody's, their spouse, and they were saying that, in their childhood, the father was absent, and the mother was because she had to cope with a lot, very emotionally absent. So the spouse, a husband of a friend of mine, the way he dealt with emotional issues was just to switch off and detach and not discuss things. And it was interesting to hear what his childhood was like, that impact of the parents, and perhaps that had affected him, that now he couldn't express himself so openly because he wasn't allowed to as a child. There was no output for him to tell his mother how he felt without the father. And it's amazing how, if we don't check in with ourselves, with our mental health, with our reactions and actions as an adolescence, going on from that into adulthood, we could have lifelong implications of not normal, abnormal behaviours, couldn't we? Which impact others then around us. So it doesn't have to be extreme. I mean, I'm using extreme because I've seen those children in sort of, quite dire situations, and your heart goes out to them. But even in our society, there's so much that can, that does affect us. But we've got to. Would you say that would be the best way to sort of always tune into yourself? And
that's what we call those years, the formative years, isn't it? Because it's almost like that is where the individual personality is being formed. There's another saying, I remember one of my clinical supervisors saying, is that the child is the parent of the adult. So in other words, the experiences that we go through as a child kind of inform us, the kind of an individual that you have as an adult.
Right.
And a kind of like graphic example is that child that was raised in poor surroundings and poverty, and has a chance to make a good living for themselves, sometimes can be over ostentatious because they can remember, they're kind of rebelling against that lack of. So everything's about abundance and hey, this defines my self-esteem, because I remember those days of being elbowed over somebody's nice car, or kind of cast aside as invaluable. So childhood is key. Adolescent development is key, and be a little bit patient, be a little bit understanding. But that doesn't mean we accept the unacceptable, but that little bit of sabr with the young people.
So we have to end it there. We've gone over time. Thank you so much. The wonderful point again, sabr with young people, showing them compassion as much as they might drive us up the wall. Bless them. But thank you so much, and pray for a blessed day for you ahead.
Exactly.
And that's all we have time for at the moment. So we're going to head over to the kitchen, favourite part of my show as well, and we're going to join Fahima and Sana.